To win a Civilization 6 religious victory, you typically need to build holy sites to found your religion. But can you win a Civ 6 religious victory without building any holy sites? To make the challenge worse, I'm not allowed to buy any religious units even if I capture a holy site, making the challenge seem almost impossible, but the key word is almost. We settle Constantinople and have one goal in mind. We are in desperate need of a religion. If we don't, we fail before the challenge even takes off. But there is one thing we can do with the stone located near our capital. The stone lets us build the Stonehenge Wonder, which grants a free great prophet and religion. The problem is this is deity, and by going all in on an early wonder, we sacrifice military and infrastructure development, meaning other players can take advantage of this opportunity of weakness. So we need to somehow meet other civs, survive enemy agents, and expand cities, all while building one of the most notoriously difficult wonders to get. While exploring, we find the greatest thing we could have possibly asked for: a relic. This changes everything, leaving me crying tears of elated joy at the discovery. This relic completely solves our expansion problems, but before we discuss how, our warrior is putting in work, meeting both the Congo to the north and Vietnam to the west. And now this may pose a problem, as with us being focused single-mindedly on a religion and without much of an army to speak of, they can take this opportunity of weakness to surprise attack us. So we just have to be wary. But all that wariness washes away as I'm fisting the air and hollering as we get lucky again. Now, Uluru in the desert is completely awful to settle and definitely weakens us long-term as it reduces any potential cities we can construct, so why am I excited? Well, it gives a boost to astrology, which is the technology needed for Stonehenge, giving us a head start on the hardest wonder in the game. This doesn't stop me from sweating bullets, as for the next 20 turns we're completely vulnerable to an enemy attack, building a wonder that might get taken from us at any moment. So could we pull off this daring gambit? For a time all seemed quiet as the relic from earlier finally pays dividends. Relics provide faith per turn, and a lot of it, essentially guaranteeing us the first Pantheon, meaning we get our pick of the litter. And there's no Pantheon better than religious settlements, which gives us a second city, instrumental in keeping us competitive in development, saving the 10 to 15 turns we'd need to build the settler, and with that second city we can now use that to focus on military and builders while still building Stonehenge. All we needed to do was settle it, and that was going well until my heart dropped when the barbs attacked in the exact place I wanted to settle. But even worse than that, they also threatened to ruin my game since I can't afford to move off of Stonehenge and build units. And with my warrior still far down south exploring, this left me defenseless except for a singular slinger, who with 5 combat strength was far too fragile and couldn't possibly hope to defeat an encampment all by himself. However, I needed to somehow do just that, and to accomplish that task, I had to get creative. By using the river to my advantage and help from Venice, I was able to defeat the barbs and even settle my second city. This reprieve gave my capital enough time to finish Stonehenge before anybody else, granting a free great prophet, and has the ability to allow us to found a religion, but the only important belief you need to remember is Crusader. That, along with getting horses, is pivotal for this strategy, and as I get on that, I realize I may have to put those plans on hold. To make matters worse, the barbarians in the southern encampment are also mustering their forces, and so I steel my heart and went to see what I was up against. I trembled and even showmit myself a little at the sight I saw, discovering Vietnam's main army as she tried to hide their main forces by eliminating my scout, but it was already too late. I did end up losing a valuable military unit, which reduces my potential effectiveness in a response, but by forcing her to reveal her hand earlier, this gave me more time to prepare. But the trouble is starting to pile on, as at the same time as her declaration, the barbs are sending their own massive army north, leaving me with the impossible challenge of having to defeat 2 armies without even having one. And this is where I started to worry. With the extra combat strength they get from deity, attacking them head on is foolish, letting them besiege Constantinople, and moving our forces up north to keep the supply lines and city open. But this also doubles as a trap for Vietnam, who are now caught in between my archers and the barbs as they couldn't resist the thought of my juicy capital home alone. But much to their surprise, they were more in for a Kevin McAllister type response. This slows them down enough for me to buy another archer at the perfect time, as I was able to finish off her units before eliminating the barbs. As much as I would have loved to chase her and mop up her forces, the barbs still weren't done and were sending a second army along with a powerful Jaguar warrior up north. I was able to defeat them by using the river line as a defense before marching in and destroying their camp, saving my capital city. While looking for any barbarian stragglers, I meet Eleanor on my eastern border, who wiped out the stragglers, which is great for us, but despite now successfully defending my capital, I let Vietnam get away, giving her time to reorganize her forces, as she was no doubt preparing for round 2, but now, so was I. And I was bloodlusted. The plan for this game is simple. The reason I took Crusade and needed horsemen was due to Basil's unique ability, which converts enemy cities when I destroy their nearby units. And my cavalry units ignore walls in enemy cities following my religion. Not only does this remove one defense that could have caused us problems, but with Crusade, fighting in cities following my religion gives us a massive boost to combat strength, letting us wipe out enemy units with impunity, and thus repeating the cycle until I convert everyone to my religion. But obviously I am still at a huge disadvantage, as they can just use religious units to convert back their cities, whereas I can't. And not only that, but I also have to stay at war for this to work, which is going to cause the other AI to denounce me, thus reducing my economic trade opportunities and potentially falling behind the AI in development. But I have a plan for that too, which we'll get into a little later. First, we have to deal with the second Vietnamese assault. I declare war on England as well to begin killing off her units, but this leaves me in a precarious two-front war, which kinda scares me a little, not gonna lie. Especially since I still don't have any of the aforementioned military bonuses I needed, and so I had to take the initiative. But before that, I needed a decisive advantage. That advantage is horsemen, the strongest unit in the game at this point, and just as I was about to run Roughshed, my heart dropped as Vietnam was one step ahead. Despite this wild turn of events, I ended up using the river and was able to fend off the horsemen with arrows as it was weakened by being on floodplains. This victory let me advance on Kun Quang, where she attacked across a river, allowing me to convert her cities and make use of Crusade. But as I was too enamored at her tactical blunder, I made one of my own, forgetting about Nazca, who was allied to Vietnam, who ended up catching out most of my army with their well-supplied troops. Their counterattack stalled my advance, as this was going to slow me down immeasurably and left me frustrated. The few units up north weren't going to be enough, and I needed to break the deadlock. I took Oligarchy for unit experience gain, combat bonus, and the policies conscription and maneuver to build more units faster. But as the battle is raging on west, let's check in on the eastern front, where I sent a lone horseman to pillage and convert Eleanor's cities. This was all going well until he was caught out in an awful spot and almost died in one turn. This forced me to retreat right to where London could attack with impunity, but thankfully, due to the extra movement speed and lucky promotion, the horseman was able to escape. But this proved England was going to be tough, and so we needed more troops. But those troops were caught up in the west as Vietnam launched a counterattack, almost breaking my forces with their cavalry charge. But due to the bonuses we acquired, the archers were able to hold out strong and defeated the horsemen next turn, all thanks to the combat boost from Crusade. Down south, the same occurred, where we used the terrain to completely wipe out Nazcan reinforcements. With this victory, Kun Quang fell, and the Vietnamese capital was wide open. And with England still proving too tough a nut to crack, I elected to continue pushing west. But before we continue, if you enjoy the video so far, leave a like and subscribe to not miss out on future content like this. Vietnam, enraged at Nazca's incompetence, took over command of their army as a battle for Thang Long was coming. But we couldn't afford to send reinforcements, as at this point we were falling behind economically, needing to put focus on our domestic issues and thus begun building campuses, traders, builders, and settlers. But to make things worse, with our forces stretched thin, our southern border was overrun with barbarians, as I could only afford to send a single rider regiment to deal with it, weakening but still leaving most of my forces in the battle for Thang Long, which we were barely able to win until she sent a cavalry charge. That shattered most of my veterans. The biggest problem here was that the capital refused to submit to my religion, no matter how many units I killed, and other fronts weren't exactly going much better. In the east, my cavalry still healing, and down south my tundra scouts were encircled by barbs, who somehow in their Inuit homeland managed to master advanced technology despite no concept of a social structure. The horseman was able to ignore the zone of control and made it out of there alive. But the same couldn't exactly be said for the west, where we were forced to retreat the remnants of our army to better defensive positions as we were completely walled. We still hadn't converted a single civ as the situation was looking hopeless. Despite that, my infrastructure projects were mostly completed and I could now go for a full-on war economy. With nothing going well on any front, I was getting a little desperate, building a whole new army that joined with the Horse Scout down south and Eastern English horsemen to begin assaulting England proper. However, with that taken care of, that left us in dire need of more soldiers in the west, and this is where we were thrown a bone. A golden age which let us spend faith on buying builders who were able to improve tiles and chop out units, thus increasing production. Units that would be needed to reinforce the Western Front, which was looking brutal, and after almost losing my nerve and the battle, I was eventually able to stop Vietnam outside of Thang Long despite heavy casualties, preventing them from linking up their forces with Nazca as an opportunity arose. The advance on the Eastern Front left me stunned. Manchester, Liverpool, gone, as the open terrain gave our fast horsemen the opportunity to encircle and destroy, but not completely without loss. Despite this, we were still able to break Liverpool, as there was nothing between us and the English heartland. So could we replicate this rapid advance on the Western Front? With a new army built, I'd hope so, as we launched the spring offensive against Nazca. They were completely unprepared as we stormed through and made the great city-state bend before too long, as in the midst of the siege, Yongle emissaries came out to meet us. The great news was that he had no idea about England, meaning we could mop up their cities without fear of him denouncing us and stopping trade just yet. I make peace with Eleanor and left her as a converted buffer state against the barbarians to the south I didn't have the will to eliminate. This left us with nothing to do in the east, as both Yongle, Congo, as well as the unmet Civ were both behind Thang Long, meaning that was our next priority. Despite this, they had their unique unit, the Voi Xian, leaving her so confident in her victory, even the civilians came to watch the battle, only to be taken as states' rights. But it wasn't over, as she had even more cities we needed to punch through, as this slow pace left me feeling a little frustrated. Not only that, but I was fearful of their close ally Mongolia intervening, so I had to end this fast. It wasn't all bad, however, as we did have a massive advantage, as Vietnam was now struggling to keep her crumbling empire together, and this led to a reduction of both production as well as gold in her cities. This advantage in industrial capacity gave me the advantage as I split my vast army into two, and after a long, hard, and throbbing siege, I was able to take her last two strongholds, eliminating her from the game. With her head on a pike outside my palace, the next logical step was to continue advancing against the Mongols, but they looked to be a lot tougher, having their own unique unit, the Keshig. A little scary, sure, but not as terrifying as the world leader in military technology, the barbarians. barbarians, who themselves had a well-supplied advanced army, forcing us to find a way to catch up if we don't want to be slaughtered, leaving both my plans and pride in ruins. To do that, we held gladiatorial games to find the best riders our vast empire had to offer. After sifting through the BBLs as my instructions could have been clear, I'll admit, an elite group was formed into the Tagma regiments. We conducted a field test down south, eliminating the Barbs before advancing on their troublesome outpost. I was relieved as after pillaging and securing the south, we could now focus everything we had on the north. But despite all that, I was still far behind as I still had to convert 3 total civs, so in my desperation, hard-built entertainment complexes and rushed my Tagmas up north. But with time running out, I had to take more extreme measures, attacking the Congo to bait out his units so I could convert his cities. But before he could muster his forces, I took on Nanmandol as the Mongols were using it as a forward operating base, and hopefully their cities were close enough to where when I destroy a Nanmandol unit, I'd hopefully be converting their cities as well. But reinforcements slowed as they had to be sent down south since the Barbs had many more units and the fog of war in England was proving incompetent. I was struggling to decide whether to send my units north or south as the Barbs were bad, sure, but Mongolia wasn't just going to sit there and wait for me to isolate them. As luck would have it, the Congo was busy dealing with my own ally Granada, so I took the risk and decided to attack the Mongols, sending all hands on deck to that front, as after eliminating some units, I had the city-state converted. This was an advantage, but I was now in a war against 3 major powers across 3 different fronts. I needed to find a way to simplify all that. The Battle of Nanmandol was bloody, as even our own brothers were turned against us, and as it raged on, the barbarians down south were empowered with our distraction, launching their own attack on the southern border. To defeat the mixed barbarians' tribal alliance, monarchy was established to centralize authority, but that didn't stop them from slowly advancing on Trebizond. However, the worst disaster was yet to come. With my forces barely holding on in the northern and southern front, the Congo had defeated Granada a lot earlier than anticipated and were now on the move. I couldn't afford to send more than a paltry stalling force east since the Mongolians had broken our ciphers, and I was losing ground on all 3 fronts. I thought to myself, this was bad. To stem the tide, I first retreated in the south to reduce my front lines and stabilize the defense. With some units freed up north I degraded Nanmandol's city defenses, removing the ranged attack as the Mongols tried and failed to bait us with their own. With Nanmandol on the brink of collapse, they were forced to rush in and support their allies, but they didn't realize that they fell right into my trap. With Crusade, they were decimated completely as I quickly sent a relief force to the east to stem the Congo tide, saving us from a complete disaster. But with all these casualties, the people were getting war-weary back home, and with no end to the war in sight since we had no tech or Crusade advantage anymore, we needed to regain the initiative. I caved and granted some freedoms in domestic politics in exchange for economic support in the war effort. With the extra stability and cash flow, I was able to purchase firearms for my cavalry, and with the Mongols neutered, it was full steam ahead against the Congo. There were losses, many of which, but with our tech and eventually Crusade advantage, the Battle of Fort Quango ended in our favor. However, the real breakthrough came west of the battle. Securing the city-state of Nanmandol allowed better cooperation between both armies, as we could now advance and resupply a common front. But before the death blow, we needed to ensure we were well prepared for the last major advance. The effectiveness of our guns against the Congo delighted me so much that I equipped my entire army with these firearms. With the tech advantage, we launched a 2-pronged offensive, first against the Congo, where Can Thao and Quango were put under siege. As we wait for that siege to pan out, our second common front was stalled early on with a Mongol counterattack, in a desperate effort to save their ally, but after holding our ground, Mongolia was now open. As we advanced west, we found success east with Quango taken and the Congolese industrial heartland now laid open. After such decisive victories, distinctions were given to Pee Pee Poo. Guys, come on, we're gonna need more names in the comments. The second is surely gonna be better. The Nick, the New York, Steve Kerr's son, who aided greatly against Fort Aksu, which was tough and on great defensive terrain. This left the two major Mongolian settlements wide open as they threw their whole weight against our rapidly advancing forces, since losing these two cities would spell disaster for them. Despite their near elimination of multiple army groups from this attack, we barely won by the skin of our teeth. As I breathed a sigh of relief, having won a decisive victory, peace with honor was established, where the settlements were returned to both Mongolia and Congo, as long as they recognized the superiority of my religion. All that was left to complete the challenge was Yongle. But you see, the problem was my enemies, despite losing, were still strong. And Yongle was a massive power in his own right, having been spared from the devastation war brings upon. I needed to convert him peacefully, or else risk having to face a forefront war, which is too much even for me. So we came to an agreement, joining our two empires into one where he took political control and we took religious control, infiltrating the deep state as we now pull the strings behind every civilization behind the scenes. If you enjoyed this almost world domination but are left felt wanting to watch me actually conquer the world in an impossible Civ 6 challenge, check out this video where I conquered the world with just my starting warrior.